If you're not careful, self-love can become avoidance. And the cost is simple. You might be protecting yourself from discomfort, but you're denying yourself connection. You might be telling yourself that you're protecting your peace and putting boundaries in place. But what if it's much simpler? What if you're just avoiding conversations that you probably need to have? That's what this video is about. The difference between self-love that protects you and self-love that keeps you stuck. This video breaks down 3 signs your self-love might already have turned into avoidance. Because sometimes the thing that feels like emotional maturity is actually just fear with better branding. Avoidance rarely feels like avoidance while you're doing it, and it often feels like you're doing the emotionally mature thing. One minute you're hurt. The next, you have a whole explanation lined up. They're unavailable. They don't respect you. They never really cared the way you did. And sometimes your assessment is right. Some relationships really would only pull you back into a cycle you already understand, and a firm boundary is absolutely necessary. So in those moments, the distance isn't avoidance, it's self-respect. So we're not talking about abandoning your boundaries here. We're talking about when healing becomes the excuse you're using to avoid practicing honesty. Self-love can be about resting, pausing, and taking space for yourself. But sometimes it's also about telling the truth, apologizing for your part, and making space to see whether repair is possible. Avoidance gives you relief, which honestly feels good. But facing a difficult conversation feels different altogether, so it's natural that you might default to avoidance. The thing is, growth often happens in the part you're trying to skip. So how do you know when self-love has crossed into avoidance? There are 3 signs you need to look out for. The first is that you've chosen to build a case in your head as a substitute for having a conversation. Instead of asking what happened, you start rehearsing what it must mean. You start playing everything back while gathering all of your evidence. And the more you think about it, the more certain you feel. Most of the time, your conclusion isn't based on actual evidence. It's based on obsession, with no room left for curiosity or another perspective. This is where overthinking can start to feel like intuition. You tell yourself, I just know. And that might be partly true. But sometimes what you're calling intuition is actually rumination with a better reputation. Intuition is usually clear, but rumination is just repetitive. Intuition says something feels off, while rumination keeps replaying the same scene until you've convinced yourself of their guilt. And if you never speak to them, you'll never find out whether the story in your head was true, incomplete, or just built from fear. To be clear, this doesn't mean you owe everyone a conversation. But if your mind has already tried, judged, and sentenced them before you've said a word, that might not be self-love. That might be avoidance. The second sign is that your boundary arrives before your need. A real boundary isn't a punishment or a threat. A real boundary is about how you will respond when something important to you keeps being ignored. But a lot of people skip the part where they ask what they actually need and jump straight to protection. You might know what you don't want and what you won't tolerate, but have you asked yourself, what do I actually need here? There's a big difference between I need more consistency from you, and I'm done with people who can't show up. And there's a big difference between that hurt me and I need us to talk about it, and I'm protecting my peace from this energy. The first version is honest, but the second version only keeps you protected. And if the boundary appears before you've understood the need, it can become a wall instead of a line. A boundary protects your values, but a blockade only protects your fear. One helps you be clear, while the other only helps you hide. The third sign is that the peace you're protecting is starting to feel lonely. Being alone doesn't always mean you're lonely. Taking space can be restorative, and sometimes it's the right thing to do. But there's a difference between choosing space and hiding from connection. If every difficult moment becomes a reason to pull back, eventually you're not just protecting your peace, you're protecting yourself from having to face reality. Life is full of friction, so awkward conversations are part of this. Sometimes we have to admit, I acted like I was fine, but I wasn't. and face up to it. However, sometimes silence really is the answer, especially when explaining yourself again would only drain you or open you up to harm. But be mindful that "I shouldn't have to explain myself" may be your way of avoiding the fact that healthy relationships do require communication when things get tough. And we're not talking about begging or pleading, just simple, thoughtful communication. The kind where you say what happened inside you, and then you watch what the other person does with that information. That's how you find out what's real. Not by rehearsing the conversation in your head, but by seeing what happens when you actually have it, even if it's uncomfortable. The useful question is not, did they hurt me? People will hurt you sometimes. The better question is, what happens when I tell them? Do they get curious, or do they get cruel? Do they take responsibility, or do they turn it back on you? Do they make repair possible, or do they make honesty feel unsafe? Because that response tells you whether the relationship has room for repair, or whether your distance is actually the right thing to do. Real self-love shouldn't make you unreachable. It should make you clearer, not more closed off. There's a part of you that wants to grow, and a part of you that never wants to be hurt again. One will build a life with boundaries, honesty, repair, and real connection. The other will protect you from disappointment, but it may also keep you alone.